You don't love me. You love my $30 million inheritance, Theo. Hadley's voice cuts through the stunned silence of Apex Innovation's boardroom, her words a dagger aimed at her husband, Theo, as FBI agents snap handcuffs on his wrists. Where are you listening from, folks? New York, Atlanta, or somewhere across the globe? What do you think happens when a woman discovers her husband's betrayal at her darkest hour? Stick with us to unravel this gripping tale of deception, revenge, and triumph. We're dropping thrilling stories like this every week, so hit that subscribe button and share in the comments where you're tuning in to join our community. Will Hadley outsmart her predator husband? Can she reclaim her power? Don't miss a second. Listen to the end and let us know your thoughts below. The key scraped in the lock, a sound so sharp it seemed to slice through the heavy silence of the Brooklyn brownstone, reverberating like a gunshot in Hadley Monroe's ears. She stood frozen at her front door, her breath catching in her throat. The emerald silk of her funeral dress clung to her skin, damp with sweat from the oppressive city heat, its elegance now marred by wrinkles from the long flight from Atlanta. In her trembling hand, she clutched her father's funeral program, its edges creased from her relentless grip, a fragile relic of the day she'd said goodbye to the man who'd been her anchor. The weight of it felt heavier than the polished mahogany coffin she'd watched lowered into the earth just hours ago, her tears blurring the roses draped across it. Hadley's chest tightened, grief a living thing coiled around her heart. But something else stirred beneath it, a prickle of unease that made her skin crawl. The brownstone, their home for 3 years, should have felt like a sanctuary after the sterile hospital rooms and the somber funeral parlor. Instead, it was alien, charged with an energy that set her nerves on edge. The air was too still, the polished hardwood floors gleaming under the chandelier's muted glow, reflecting fragments of a life she thought she knew. Hadley's eyes darted to the staircase, its mahogany banister curving upward into shadows. Muffled voices drifted from above, low, intimate, unmistakable. A woman's giggle, light and teasing, pierced the quiet. Then a man's chuckle, rich and warm, a sound that had once made Hadley's heart flutter with love. Her stomach lurched. That voice belonged to Theo Whitmore, her husband, the man whose blue eyes and easy charm had swept her off her feet. Theo, who was supposed to be at his Manhattan office, closing a deal he'd sworn was too critical to miss her father's funeral. "I'm so sorry, love," he'd murmured days ago, his hands framing her face as she packed her suitcase, tears streaming down her cheeks. His lips had brushed her forehead, a gesture so tender it had dulled the ache of his absence. "Your dad would want me to secure our future. You know I'd be there if I could." Hadley had believed him, clung to his words like a lifeline as she boarded the plane alone, her heart heavy with loss. Now, standing in their pristine foyer, her Louis Vuitton suitcase still gripped in one hand, those words turned to ash in her mouth. The voices were coming from their bedroom, their sacred space, where Theo had whispered promises of forever, his fingers tracing dreams across her skin under the soft glow of their bedside lamp. The room where they'd planned a family, a future, a life entwined. Her pulse thundered in her ears, a drumbeat drowning out the rational voice urging her to turn back, to pretend she hadn't heard. But Hadley couldn't move, rooted to the spot as if the floor had claimed her. The suitcase slipped from her fingers, landing with a soft thud on the Persian rug. Each step toward the staircase felt like wading through quicksand, her legs heavy, her breath shallow. The voices grew clearer, their intimacy a blade twisting in her gut. The woman's giggle again, followed by Theo's low murmur, too soft to discern, but laced with a warmth he hadn't shown Hadley in months. Her mind raced, conjuring excuses. Maybe it was a colleague discussing work, a friend offering comfort. But the lie crumbled as quickly as it formed. Theo had said he was at the office, not home, not in their bedroom with another woman. Hadley's hand grazed the banister, its cool wood grounding her as she climbed, each step deliberate, silent. The funeral program crumpled further in her fist, her father's smiling face on the cover, a silent witness to her unraveling world. Marcus Monroe had been her rock, a man of quiet strength who'd raised her to trust her instincts, to face the world with courage. "You're stronger than you know, my star," he'd said in his final days, his voice frail but fierce. Now those words echoed in her mind, urging her forward even as fear clawed at her chest. The hallway upstairs was dim, the air thick with the scent of Theo's cologne, a blend of cedar and citrus that once felt like home, but now turned her stomach. She paused outside their bedroom door, the voices now crystal clear, though the words were still indistinct. The woman's laughter was light, carefree, a sound that didn't belong in Hadley's home. Theo's voice followed, a soft rumble that carried an edge of amusement, the same tone he used to coax smiles from Hadley on her darkest days. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling, but she couldn't bring herself to turn it. Not yet. Instead, she pressed her back against the wall, her breath hitching as she strained to listen, to understand. The betrayal was already taking shape in her mind, a jagged truth she wasn't ready to face but couldn't escape. In her purse, tucked against her side, was the unopened envelope her father had given her in his final moments. "Keep this safe, darling," he'd whispered, his hand weak but insistent as he pressed it into her palm. "Don't tell Theo. Not yet. Trust your heart." She'd thought it was grief talking, a sentimental gesture from a dying man. But now, with Theo's voice mingling with another woman's in their bedroom, her father's warning took on a new weight. What had he known? What had he seen in Theo that Hadley, blinded by love, had missed? Her eyes stung with unshed tears, but she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. Not here, not now. She needed clarity, not sorrow. The voices paused, replaced by the rustle of fabric, a soft creak of the bed. Hadley's heart stuttered, her imagination painting vivid, unbearable images. She wanted to scream, to burst through the door and demand answers. But something held her back, her father's voice, steady and calm, urging her to wait, to listen, to be smart. She slid her hand into her purse, fingers brushing the envelope's crisp edge. Whatever was inside, it was her father's final gift, his last act of protection. And in this moment, with her world teetering on the edge of collapse, Hadley clung to it like a lifeline, knowing that whatever lay beyond that door would change everything. Hadley Monroe's back pressed against the cool plaster of the upstairs hallway, her breath shallow, as if the slightest sound might betray her presence outside their bedroom door. The air was thick with the scent of Theo's cologne, a cruel reminder of the man she thought she knew. Her heart pounded, a frantic rhythm that threatened to drown out the voices seeping through the oak door. Voices that twisted her grief into something sharper, more venomous. Theo Whitmore's low chuckle, once a melody that warmed her soul, now cut like a blade, each note laced with a mockery she'd never heard before. Beside it, a woman's voice, silky, teasing, and achingly familiar, wove through the air, a siren's call that turned Hadley's blood to ice. Claire Beaumont, Theo's colleague at Apex Innovations, the woman who'd sent lilies and a saccharine condolence card when Hadley's father fell ill, was inside her bedroom, laughing with her husband. "She'll never suspect," Theo said, his voice dripping with a confidence that made Hadley's stomach churn. "Hadley's too wrapped up in her grief. 6 months of this, and she hasn't noticed a thing." The words landed like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. 6 months. While she'd been flying to Atlanta, holding her father's hand through endless hospital nights, wiping tears from her eyes as his strength faded, Theo had been here, in their home, in their bed, with Claire. The betrayal was a living thing, clawing at her insides, but Hadley forced herself to stay still, to listen, to let the truth carve itself into her heart. "Are you sure she won't find out about the inheritance?" Claire's voice was breathy, intimate, the kind of tone reserved for lovers sharing secrets. "Her father was loaded. There's got to be millions coming." Hadley's hand flew to her purse, fingers brushing the unopened envelope her father had pressed into her palm in his final moments. "Keep this safe, darling," he'd whispered, his eyes fierce despite the hospital's pallor. "Don't tell Theo. Not yet. Trust your heart." She'd thought it was a grieving man's sentimentality, but now with Claire's words hanging in the air, her father's warning took on a sinister weight. What did Theo know? What had he been planning while she mourned? She thinks I'm working late to support her, Theo continued, his tone laced with a cruel amusement that made Hadley's skin crawl. Poor thing's so trusting. Once we're divorced, I'll get half of everything. Her father owned half of Brooklyn. We're talking tens of millions, Claire. Then it's you and me. No more hiding. The words were a guillotine, severing the last threads of the life Hadley had believed in. Divorce, inheritance, half of everything. Theo wasn't just cheating, he was orchestrating her destruction, waiting like a vulture for her father's wealth to fatten his prize. Her fingers tightened around the envelope, its edges biting into her palm, grounding her as the world spun. When will you file for divorce? Claire asked, her voice casual, as if they were discussing dinner plans. The bed creaked softly, a sound that sent a jolt of nausea through Hadley. She could picture them, Claire's blonde hair spilling across the pillows, Theo's hands, those same hands that had held her through nightmares, now touching another woman. Soon, Theo replied, his voice smooth as silk. I'm waiting for the inheritance to hit. No point splitting assets before the big payout. Hadley doubled over, pressing her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. The man she'd loved, the man she'd vowed to build a future with, spoke of her like a mark in a con, his affection a carefully crafted lie. Her mind raced, replaying moments she'd dismissed. Theo's late nights, his sudden interest in her father's finances, the way his kisses had grown perfunctory, mechanical. How long had he despised her? How long had she been sleeping beside a stranger? The envelope in her purse felt heavier now, a silent ally against the betrayal unfolding before her. She wanted to burst through the door, to scream, to tear apart the illusion Theo had spun, but her father's voice echoed in her mind. Trust your heart. And her heart, raw and bleeding, told her to wait, to gather the pieces before she struck. The voices paused, replaced by the rustle of fabric, a soft laugh from Claire that grated like sandpaper. You're sure she doesn't suspect? Claire asked, her tone playful but edged with caution. She looked at me funny at the last company gala. Theo's laugh was sharp, dismissive. Hadley, she's too naive. She's been so focused on her dying father, she hasn't noticed I've been working late every night for months. Poor thing thinks I'm giving her space to grieve. The condescension in his voice was a new wound, each word a reminder of the trust Hadley had poured into him. Trust he'd twisted into a weapon. She slid down the wall, her legs trembling, the funeral program slipping from her hand to the floor. The photo of her father smiled up at her, his eyes kind but knowing, as if he'd foreseen this moment. Marcus Monroe had always seen through people, his quiet wisdom a shield for his daughter. The envelope was his final gift, a secret he'd kept even from her, and now it burned against her side, urging her to act. But not yet, not until she knew the full scope of Theo's treachery. Footsteps sounded inside the room, followed by the creak of the bed. I should go, Claire said, her voice closer now, as if she were standing. My fiancé thinks I'm at a networking event. Hadley's breath hitched. Fiancé. Claire wasn't just betraying her, she was betraying another life, another trust. Tomorrow, same time, Theo replied, his voice warm, intimate, the way it used to be when he spoke to Hadley in the early days of their marriage. I love you, Claire. The words were a dagger, final and unforgiving. Love you too, darling, Claire murmured, and the door handle rattled. Hadley scrambled to her feet, her heart racing as she slipped into the guest room at the end of the hall, easing the door shut just as the bedroom door opened. Claire's heels clicked down the stairs, each step a countdown to the moment Hadley was alone with the truth. Theo's humming drifted from the bedroom, carefree, oblivious, as if he hadn't just shattered her world. She sank onto the guest room bed, her hands shaking as she pulled the envelope from her purse. Her father's handwriting stared back at her, elegant and steady. For Hadley. Open when you're ready to be free. Free. The word felt foreign, impossible, yet it sparked something deep within her, a flicker of defiance beneath the pain. Theo thought he knew her, thought he could play her like a pawn in his game, but he didn't know about the envelope, didn't know the strength her father had instilled in her. Hadley's fingers hovered over the seal, hesitating. Whatever was inside, it was more than paper. It was power, a legacy, a chance to rewrite the story Theo thought he controlled. She pressed the envelope to her chest, her resolve hardening. The mask had slipped, and now she saw Theo for what he was. The question wasn't whether she would fight back, but how fiercely. Hadley Monroe sat on the edge of the guest room bed, the silence of the brownstone pressing against her like a physical weight. The echo of Claire's heels had faded, and Theo's carefree humming drifted from their bedroom, a cruel counterpoint to the storm raging in her chest. Her hands trembled as she clutched the unopened envelope from her father, its crisp edges biting into her palms. The words on the front, "For Hadley, open when you're ready to be free," burned into her vision, a beacon in the darkness of betrayal. Theo's voice, slick with deceit, still echoed in her mind. Half of everything, tens of millions. He thought he could plunder her father's legacy, discard her like a used pawn, and walk away with Claire. But this envelope, this final gift from Marcus Monroe, felt like a weapon, one she was only beginning to understand. She forced her breathing to steady, each inhale a battle against the tears threatening to spill. The guest room was a sterile haven, its beige walls and neatly made bed a stark contrast to the chaos of her emotions. The faint scent of lavender from a forgotten candle did little to soothe her. It only reminded her of the life she'd thought was hers, now exposed as a lie. Theo's humming stopped, replaced by the soft creak of floorboards as he moved through their bedroom, oblivious to her presence. Her phone buzzed on the bed beside her, Theo's name flashing across the screen. "Hope you're okay, love. Work ran late, but I'm thinking of you. Home tomorrow?" The lie was so effortless, so polished it might have fooled her yesterday. Now it fueled a fire in her gut, a resolve to uncover the truth before she confronted the man who'd shattered her trust. With a deep breath, Hadley slid her finger under the envelope's seal, the paper tearing with a sound that seemed to echo in the quiet room. Inside was a stack of documents, legal papers, property deeds, bank statements, clipped together with a single sheet of her father's elegant handwriting. Her eyes caught on the note first, its words a lifeline in the wreckage of her heart. "Hadley, my star. Theo's charm hides ambition. This trust holds $30 million in assets, yours alone. Use it to live free. I love you always, Dad." $30 million. The number hit her like a wave, dizzying and surreal. Properties, investments, cash, all shielded in a trust only she could access. Her father, the man who'd taught her to ride a bike in Prospect Park, who'd cheered at her college graduation, had been a financial titan in secret, and he'd built this fortress to protect her. She spread the documents across the bed, her fingers tracing the details with a mix of awe and dread. Deeds for Brooklyn brownstones, Williamsburg lofts, and commercial spaces in Dumbo filled one folder, their values staggering. Another held statements for investment portfolios, tech startups that had soared, and a cash reserve that alone could buy a small island. But it was the trust agreement that stopped her cold. Marcus had structured it with surgical precision. The assets were hers exclusively, untouchable by anyone else, even a spouse. Theo's name was absent from every page, his dreams of half of everything, a fantasy he'd never touch. Hadley's breath hitched as she realized the depth of her father's foresight. He'd known. Somehow he'd seen through Theo's polished exterior and acted to shield her from the betrayal she was only now uncovering. Her eyes fell on a single line in the trust. 20% ownership in Apex Innovations, held through Monroe Holdings, LLC. Apex, Theo's company, where he strutted as a senior VP, oblivious to the fact that his wife held a fifth of its shares. The irony was almost poetic. Theo, who thought he was playing her, was under her influence in ways he couldn't imagine. A cold smile curved her lips, the first spark of power igniting in her chest. She imagined him in his corner office, charming clients, plotting her downfall, unaware that she could sway the boardroom he coveted. The thought was intoxicating, a lifeline pulling her from despair to defiance. But the note from her father lingered, its warning a shadow over her newfound strength. Theo's charm hides ambition. How long had Marcus suspected? Had he seen something in Theo's easy smiles, his too perfect gestures? that Hadley had missed? She thought back to their wedding, Theo's vows so heartfelt they'd brought tears to her eyes. Had her father, standing proud in his tailored suit, already been planning this trust, knowing the man she loved might one day betray her? The thought was a fresh wound, but it also steeled her resolve. Marcus had given her more than money. He'd given her a chance to fight back, to reclaim her life from the man who'd tried to steal it. The sound of running water jolted her from her thoughts. Theo was in the shower, his humming resumed, a carefree melody that grated against her nerves. She gathered the documents, her movements swift but silent, and tucked them back into the envelope. She couldn't confront him yet, not until she understood the full scope of his plans, not until she was ready to wield the power her father had left her. Her phone buzzed again, another text from Theo. "Miss you, love? Let me know when you land." The audacity of his lies fueled her anger, but she forced herself to respond, her fingers steady as she typed. "Just got in. Exhausted. Talk tomorrow." Let him think she was still in Atlanta, still the grieving, trusting wife he could manipulate. Hadley stood, smoothing her wrinkled dress, and caught her reflection in the guest room mirror. Her dark eyes, usually warm and open, were hard now, glinting with a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. The woman staring back at her was no longer just a daughter mourning her father, or a wife betrayed by her husband. She was a force, armed with $30 million and a legacy of strength. Theo thought he knew her, thought he could outsmart her with his charm and deceit. But he didn't know about the trust, didn't know the fire her father had kindled in her soul. She slipped the envelope into her purse, its weight a promise of retribution. As Theo's shower shut off, Hadley moved to the guest room door, her steps silent on the hardwood. She'd sleep here tonight, away from the bed tainted by his betrayal, and tomorrow she'd begin to unravel his lies. The man she'd loved was a mirage, but the woman she was becoming was real, forged in grief and sharpened by truth. Marcus had given her the tools to fight, and she would use them, not just to survive, but to destroy the life Theo thought he'd built on her ruins. For the first time since she'd walked into this house, Hadley felt the stirrings of power, a quiet, burning certainty that she was no longer the prey. Hadley Monroe stood in the dim light of her father's study, the oak-paneled walls absorbing the faint creak of the brownstone as it settled around her. The air was heavy with the scent of old leather and ink, a sanctuary untouched by Theo's betrayal. Her hands, steady now, spread the documents from her father's envelope across the polished desk, each page a revelation of Marcus Monroe's genius and foresight. The trust agreement, with its $30 million in assets, Brooklyn real estate, tech investments, and liquid cash, gleamed like a sword forged for her alone. But it was the line about Apex Innovations, Theo's company, that sent a thrill through her. 20% ownership via Monroe Holdings, LLC. Theo, the man who'd mocked her trust, was under her influence, his career a fragile thread she could sever with a word. The realization was electric, a pulse of power that drowned out the echo of his cruel words from the bedroom. She sank into her father's leather chair, the worn cushion molding to her as if Marcus himself were steadying her. The study was a time capsule of his life, shelves lined with engineering journals, a framed photo of Hadley at her Howard University graduation, her smile radiant under her cap. His note, still open on the desk, was a beacon. Theo's charm hides ambition. Hadley traced the words, her father's warning, now a call to arms. Theo thought he could plunder her inheritance, discard her for Claire, and walk away with millions. But Marcus had seen through him, and this trust was his final act of defiance, a shield and a spear for his daughter to wield. The weight of betrayal still pressed against her chest, but beneath it a new strength stirred, a fire kindled by the knowledge that she held the upper hand. Her phone vibrated, Theo's name flashing like a taunt. "Hey, love, how's Atlanta? Thinking of you." The lie was brazen, typed while he stood in their home, fresh from Claire's embrace. Hadley's jaw tightened, her fingers hovering over the screen. She could confront him now, scream the truth, and watch his lies crumble. But that would be too easy, too fleeting. She needed more than his shock. She needed his ruin. She typed back, her voice in the words cool and guileless. "Rough day. still sorting Dad's stuff. Home soon. Let him think he was safe, that she was still the grieving wife he could manipulate. The deception burned, but it was a small price for the justice she was beginning to envision. Hadley turned back to the documents, her eyes scanning the trust details. The real estate portfolio was staggering. Brownstones in Bed-Stuy, lofts in Williamsburg, a commercial strip in Dumbo, each property a testament to Marcus's quiet brilliance. But the apex stake was the key, a silent lever in the machine of Theo's ambition. As a 20% shareholder, she could influence board decisions, sway personnel choices, and even demand audits that would expose Theo's misuse of company resources for his affair. The thought sent a shiver of possibility through her, a vision of Theo's smug confidence unraveling in a boardroom, his charm useless against the power she now held. She imagined his blue eyes, so often warm with feigned love, widening in panic as his world collapsed. The image was intoxicating, a balm to the wound of his betrayal. But power demanded precision. Hadley reached for her phone again, this time dialing Vincent Cole, the private investigator her father had trusted. The line crackled, then Vincent's gruff voice answered, "Ms. Monroe, been expecting you." His tone was steady, unsurprised, as if Marcus had briefed him for this moment. "You knew about Theo?" Hadley asked, her voice low, the study's walls muffling her words from Theo's ears, still somewhere in the house. "Your father had me on him for years," Vincent replied. "Photos, hotel receipts, phone logs. Theo and Claire Beaumont, 6 months and counting. He's been sloppy, thinking you're too distracted to notice." Hadley's grip tightened on the phone, Vincent's words confirming the depth of Theo's deceit. "There's more," he continued. "You own the Williamsburg apartment building where Claire lives with her fiancé. You're her landlord. The lease is up soon. That's leverage, Hadley." Leverage. The word was a spark, igniting a plan in her mind. She could evict Claire, expose her to her fiancé, and dismantle the life she'd built on lies. And Theo, she could use her Apex shares to ensure his termination, his career reduced to ash. The trust wasn't just money, it was control, a means to rewrite the narrative Theo thought he'd scripted. "Send me everything," she told Vincent, her voice firm, no trace of the trembling wife who'd stood outside her bedroom hours ago. "And dig into Claire's life. Finances, secrets, anything I can use." "You got it," Vincent said. "Your father always said you were a fighter. He'd be proud." The call ended, leaving Hadley in the study's silence, her father's presence tangible in the air. She looked at the photo on the desk, Marcus's eyes crinkling with pride. He'd known Theo's true nature, and he'd armed her for this battle. The trust was her arsenal, but the power within her, fueled by grief, anger, and love, was the true weapon. Footsteps sounded outside the study, Theo's voice humming a tune as he descended the stairs, likely cleaning up traces of Claire's visit. Hadley's pulse quickened, but she remained still, her resolve a steel core within her. She wouldn't confront him tonight. She'd play the role he expected, the trusting wife, while she gathered her strength. She tucked the documents back into the envelope, locking it in her father's safe, its combination her birth date, a reminder of Marcus's unwavering love. As she stood, her reflection caught in the study's window, the Brooklyn skyline glittering beyond. The woman staring back was no longer just Hadley Monroe, the betrayed wife. She was a force, armed with her father's legacy and a burning need for justice. Theo's voice called from downstairs, casual and warm. "Hadley, you home yet?" The lie was a final insult, assuming she was still in Atlanta, still his pawn. She took a breath, schooling her features into a mask of exhaustion, and stepped into the hallway. "Just got in," she called back, her voice steady, a perfect imitation of the woman he thought he knew. But inside, the power within her roared, a promise that Theo's days of deception were numbered. She was no longer his victim. She was his reckoning, and she would wield her father's gift to ensure he paid for every lie. Hadley Monroe stepped into the sleek Manhattan office of Evelyn Harper, her father's lawyer, the glass walls reflecting the city's restless pulse below. The morning light cast sharp shadows across the marble floor, mirroring the clarity that had settled in Hadley's heart. Gone was the trembling wife who'd overheard Theo's betrayal. In her place stood a woman forged in grief and armed with her father's $30 million legacy. Her tailored blazer hugged her frame, its deep navy a silent declaration of resolve. In her purse, the envelope from Marcus Monroe rested like a talisman, its contents, deeds, trust agreements, and a note warning of Theo's ambition, fueling her purpose. She'd spent the night in the guest room, Theo's lies still ringing in her ears. But now she was ready to turn his deception into his downfall. Evelyn, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, rose from her mahogany desk, her handshake firm and reassuring. "Hadley," Evelyn said, her voice crisp but warm, "I've reviewed your father's trust. Marcus was meticulous. The 30 million real estate, investments, cash is yours alone, untouchable by Theo, even as your spouse." She slid a folder across the desk, its pages detailing the trust's ironclad structure. Hadley's eyes skimmed the numbers. Brooklyn brownstones, Williamsburg lofts, a 20% stake in Apex Innovations, Theo's company. The power in those pages was intoxicating, a counterpoint to the helplessness she'd felt outside her bedroom door. "New York divorce law is straightforward," Evelyn continued, "but we can make it strategic. Theo's affair with Claire Beaumont gives us leverage, especially with Vincent Cole's evidence." Hadley leaned forward, her voice low but unyielding. "I don't just want a divorce, Evelyn. I want Theo and Claire to pay. I want them to feel the betrayal they've inflicted on me." The words were a vow, each syllable carved from the pain of Theo's mocking laughter, Claire's casual plotting. She saw them in her mind, Theo's smug confidence, Claire's coy giggles, planning to strip her of her father's legacy while she mourned. The memory fueled her, transforming grief into a blade she was ready to wield. Evelyn's eyes gleamed with approval, a predator recognizing another. "Then we use your assets as weapons," she said, tapping the folder. "Your 20% stake in Apex Innovations gives you a voice in board decisions. Vincent's photos and receipts show Theo's been using company resources, hotels, dinners, for his affair. That's grounds for termination with cause." Hadley's pulse quickened, imagining Theo's career, his pride reduced to rubble. "And Claire," Evelyn added, "lives in your Williamsburg building. Her lease expires soon. As a landlord, you can deny renewal, leaving her scrambling." Hadley's lips curved into a cold smile, the first genuine one since she'd returned home. "What else?" she asked, her voice hungry for more. Evelyn pulled out a map of Brooklyn, red pins marking Marcus's properties. "Your father owned key real estate, commercial spaces, residential units. Claire's fiancé works for a firm leasing one of your Dumbo properties. A lease dispute could complicate his life, expose Claire's lies to him." Hadley pictured the dominoes falling. Claire evicted, her fiancé betrayed, Theo fired, all orchestrated by the woman they'd underestimated. The thought was a spark, igniting a plan as ruthless as it was elegant. "We can orchestrate their downfall," Evelyn said, her tone almost musical. "Theo fired for misconduct, Claire evicted, her fiancé informed of her affair, and divorce papers served, all synchronized for maximum impact. They'll have no time to recover, no chance to counter." Hadley's mind raced, visualizing Theo's shock, Claire's panic, as their carefully spun lies unraveled. "How long?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. 2 weeks, Evelyn replied, "to coordinate the board, the lease, and the legal filings. Can you play the loving wife until then?" Hadley thought of Theo's text that morning. "Miss you, love. Big meeting today, but I'm yours tonight." And the effort it took to reply with a heart emoji, her stomach churning. Playing the role would be agony, each smile a lie, each touch a reminder of his deceit. But for the chance to see him crumble, to reclaim her power, she'd endure it. "I can do anything for 2 weeks," she said, her voice a steel thread. Evelyn nodded, sliding a business card across the desk. "Vincent will deliver more evidence. Claire's financials, Theo's movements. We'll build an airtight case." Hadley took the card, her fingers brushing the embossed name of Vincent Cole, her father's trusted investigator. Marcus had chosen his allies well, each one a piece in the chess game he'd set up to protect her. She stood smoothing her blazer and caught her reflection in the office's glass wall. Her dark eyes, once soft with love, now burned with purpose, her posture radiating a strength she hadn't known she possessed. As she stepped into the elevator, the city sprawling below, Hadley felt the weight of her father's trust settle into her bones. It wasn't just money, it was control, a means to rewrite the narrative Theo and Claire thought they'd scripted. She imagined confronting Theo in the Apex boardroom, his charm useless against her evidence, his future in her hands. Claire, too, would face the consequences of her betrayal, her smug laughter silenced by an eviction notice. The plan was a tapestry, each thread, Vincent's photos, Evelyn's legal maneuvers, Marcus's assets, woven with precision. Hadley's phone buzzed as she reached the lobby, another text from Theo. "Dinner tonight? Just us." She stared at the words, her thumb hovering over the screen. Every instinct screamed to ignore him, to let him stew in his lies, but the trap required her to play along, to keep him unsuspecting. "Sounds perfect," she typed, adding a smiley face that felt like a betrayal of her own heart. She stepped onto the Manhattan sidewalk, the city's pulse syncing with her own. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to build a trap that would ensnare Theo and Claire, exposing their greed and shattering their illusions. Hadley walked with purpose, her father's legacy a fire in her veins, ready to burn their world to ash. Hadley Monroe sat in the quiet of her father's study, the Brooklyn brownstone cloaked in the stillness of early morning. The oak desk before her was a battlefield, strewn with the documents of her father's $30 million trust, her arsenal against Theo's betrayal. The faint hum of the city beyond the window was a distant pulse, unable to pierce the fortress of her resolve. Her phone, resting beside a framed photo of her and Marcus at her college graduation, buzzed with a new message from Vincent Cole, her father's private investigator. The screen glowed with a single line. "Call me. Found something big on Theo." Hadley's heart quickened, a mix of dread and anticipation surging through her. She'd thought Theo's affair with Claire was the extent of his deceit, but Vincent's tone, urgent, grim, suggested something darker. She dialed his number, her fingers steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. "Hadley," Vincent's gruff voice answered, cutting through the static like a blade. "I dug deeper into Theo, like you asked. You're not gonna like this." His words were a warning, but Hadley was beyond shock, her emotions forged into a cold, sharp focus. "Tell me," she said, her voice low, the study's walls absorbing the sound as if guarding her secrets. Vincent exhaled, a sound heavy with the weight of discovery. Theo was married before, to a black woman named Aisha Carter in Chicago, from 2018 to 2020. Same playbook as with you. Married her for her family's real estate fortune, had an affair with a co-worker, then divorced her, taking half her assets when she couldn't prove his infidelity. Hadley's breath caught, the air in the study suddenly stifling. Theo, her charming husband with the easy smile, wasn't just a cheater, he was a predator, a man who'd built a career on exploiting women. The photo of her and Marcus seemed to watch her, her father's eyes steady, as if he'd known this truth all along. "How did you find this?" Hadley asked, her voice a whisper, her mind racing to process the revelation. Aisha Carter, another black woman, another life destroyed by Theo's calculated charm. She imagined Aisha's pain, the betrayal mirroring her own, and a new anger flared, not just for herself, but for a woman she'd never met. "Court records," Vincent said, "divorce filings, financial settlements." Aisha's family owned a string of properties in Chicago's South Side. Theo married her, gained her trust, then started an affair within a year. When she suspected, he gaslit her, made her feel paranoid, just like he's doing with you. She hired a PI, but it was too late. Theo had already maneuvered to claim half her inheritance. She got almost nothing in the settlement. Hadley's hand tightened around the phone, her nails digging into her palm. The parallels were chilling. Theo's late nights, his sudden interest in her father's estate, the way he'd brushed off her concerns with a smile. "Is there more?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with a growing fury. Vincent paused, and she could almost hear him weighing his words. "Yeah," he said finally. "I found at least 2 other women before Aisha. Same pattern. successful women, often with family money, targeted by Theo. He marries them, builds trust, then betrays them with an affair while siphoning their assets. He's a professional, Hadley. This isn't just about you or Claire. It's what he does for a living. The room spun, the study's walls closing in as Hadley processed the scope of Theo's predation. He wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a serial fraudster, a chameleon who slipped into women's lives, stole their futures, and vanished to hunt again. Her mind flashed to their wedding, Theo's vows so heartfelt she'd wept, believing every word. Had he been planning her ruin even then, his blue eyes hiding a predator's calculation? The thought was a knife, but it also sharpened her resolve, turning her pain into purpose. She stood, pacing the study, her footsteps silent on the Persian rug. "Does he know you found this?" she asked, her voice now a blade, honed by the truth. "No way," Vincent replied. "I've kept this invisible, just like your father wanted. But there's something else. Aisha's in Atlanta now teaching. I tracked her down. She's willing to talk if you want to hear her story." Hadley stopped pacing, her eyes falling on her father's note, still open on the desk. Theo's charm hides ambition. Marcus had suspected, had hired Vincent to watch Theo, and now Aisha's testimony could be the key to dismantling him. "Set it up," Hadley said, her decision instant, unwavering. "I need to know everything. His methods, his lies, how he operates. And Vincent, keep digging. If there are other victims, I want their names." The idea of confronting Theo with a coalition of his victims, their voices united against his crimes, sent a surge of power through her. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Aisha, for the others, for every woman Theo had broken. Vincent's voice softened, a rare warmth breaking through his gruff exterior. "Your father always said you were a fighter, Hadley. He'd be proud." The call ended, leaving Hadley in the study's quiet embrace, her father's presence a steadying force. She picked up the trust agreement, her eyes lingering on the Apex Innovations stake. Theo thought he was untouchable, plotting her divorce from the safety of his corner office. But she held 20% of his world, a silent empire he didn't know existed. The thought of walking into that boardroom, of watching his confidence crumble, was a fire in her veins. Her phone buzzed again, Theo's name flashing like a challenge. "Dinner tonight, love. Missed you." The lie was a taunt, but Hadley's response was calculated, her fingers steady as she typed, "Sounds great. Can't wait." She'd play his game, mirror his deception, until the moment she sprang her trap. The study's window framed the Brooklyn skyline, its lights a promise of the power she now wielded. Theo had underestimated her, mistaking her kindness for weakness, her trust for naivety. But Hadley was no longer his prey. She was a hunter, armed with her father's legacy and a growing army. Hadley Monroe stood at the kitchen counter of her Brooklyn brownstone, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint tang of her father's old leather-bound books from the study. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting a golden glow across the marble island. But it did little to warm the cold resolve that had settled in her chest. Her phone, resting beside a steaming mug, buzzed with an urgency that mirrored her pulse. Vincent Cole's name flashed on the screen, his message stark. "Urgent. Call now. Claire's deeper than we thought." Hadley's fingers tightened around the mug, the heat grounding her as she braced for another layer of Theo's betrayal. She'd spent the night poring over her father's trust documents, the $30 million legacy fueling her determination to dismantle Theo and Claire's schemes. Now Vincent's words hinted at a darker web, one that could ensnare them both. She dialed, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. "Vincent, what did you find?" The line crackled, Vincent's gruff tone cutting through like a blade. "Hadley, it's bigger than an affair. Claire Beaumont is running a high-end escort service, using Apex Innovations' client list to recruit wealthy men. Theo's been taking kickbacks for introductions, thinking he's her only lover. He's neck-deep in it, and the FBI's closing in." Hadley's breath caught, the kitchen spinning as the implications hit. Theo wasn't just cheating. He was complicit in a criminal enterprise, his ambition twisting into something far uglier than she'd imagined. The mug trembled in her hand, coffee sloshing as she set it down, her mind racing to process the scale of his deceit. "The FBI?" she asked, her voice a low hiss, the weight of federal involvement sinking in. "How did they get involved?" Vincent's tone hardened. "I tipped them off after digging into Claire's financials. She's been laundering money through shell accounts, evading taxes on over $250,000 in escort income. Theo's been facilitating, connecting her with Apex clients for a cut. They've got emails, bank records, even hotel surveillance. He's looking at charges for prostitution, money laundering, and tax evasion, federal felonies." Hadley's heart pounded, a mix of dread and dark satisfaction. Theo, with his polished suits and charming smile, had built his castle on lies, and now the FBI was poised to tear it down. She paced the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the hardwood, the trust documents still vivid in her mind. 20% of Apex Innovations, a weapon she could wield. "What's the timeline?" she asked, her voice sharp, each word a step toward justice. "Friday," Vincent replied. "The FBI's raiding Claire's apartment at 6 a.m., arresting her for tax evasion and prostitution. Theo gets picked up at Apex's board meeting at 9 a.m. You're going, Hadley. As a 20% shareholder, you've got a seat in that room. You'll watch him fall." The image was vivid. Theo's confident stride faltering, his blue eyes widening as handcuffs clicked around his wrists, her presence a silent testament to his miscalculation. The thought sent a thrill through her, a spark of power cutting through the pain. Hadley glanced at the clock, barely past dawn. Theo was still asleep upstairs, oblivious, his latest text from last night still glowing on her phone. "Dinner was perfect, love. You're my everything." The lie was a knife, but she'd learned to wield it, responding with a heart emoji to keep him unsuspecting. She needed him at that board meeting, his arrogance intact until the FBI shattered it. "What do I need to do?" she asked Vincent, her voice steady, a general preparing for battle. "Keep him in the dark," he said. "Act normal. The FBI's monitoring their phones starting today. Any change in your behavior could tip them off. You're the wild card, Hadley. They don't know you're onto them." She nodded, though Vincent couldn't see, her mind already mapping the next steps. She played the devoted wife, smile through Theo's lies, all while the FBI tightened their net. The kitchen felt smaller now, the weight of her father's legacy pressing against her. Marcus had armed her with more than money. He'd given her the chance to outmaneuver a predator. She thought of Aisha Carter, Theo's previous victim, whose story had revealed his pattern of destruction. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about stopping a man who preyed on women's trust, leaving wreckage in his wake. Her phone buzzed again, Theo's name flashing. "Morning, beautiful? Big day at work, but I'm thinking of you." The audacity was staggering, his words a performance she now saw through. She typed back, her fingers steady. "Proud of you, babe. Knock that meeting out." The lie tasted bitter, but it was necessary, a thread in the trap she was weaving. She set the phone down and moved to the sink, splashing cold water on her face, the shock sharpening her focus. The woman in the reflection was no longer the grieving daughter or betrayed wife. She was a strategist, her father's daughter, ready to wield his legacy like a blade. Vincent's voice lingered in her mind. "You'll watch him fall." She imagined the boardroom, the glass walls of Apex Innovations framing Theo's downfall, her presence a silent rebuke to his arrogance. Claire, too, would face justice, her escort empire crumbling under federal scrutiny. Hadley's lips curved into a grim smile as she poured another coffee, the mug warm against her palms. The FBI's net was closing, and she was its architect, her father's trust the foundation of her plan. Theo and Claire thought they'd outsmarted her, but in 2 days they'd learn how wrong they were. Hadley stood taller, the kitchen's golden light now a halo around her resolve, ready to step into the boardroom and claim her victory. Hadley Monroe stepped into the glass-walled boardroom of Apex Innovations, her navy suit a sharp contrast to the trembling wife she'd been days ago. The Manhattan skyline glittered beyond the windows, a cold, brilliant backdrop to the storm she was about to unleash. Her heart pounded, but her steps were steady, each click of her heels on the polished floor, a declaration of intent. Evelyn Harper, her father's lawyer, flanked her, a leather briefcase in hand, her presence a silent anchor. Hadley's purse held the envelope from Marcus Monroe, its $30 million trust a secret weapon that had transformed her from prey to predator. The boardroom buzzed with the low hum of executives, their tailored suits and murmured conversations pausing as they noticed her. Eyes widened, whispers rippled. Why was Theo Whitmore's wife here, taking a seat at the conference table? Hadley sat, her posture regal, her dark eyes scanning the room. She recognized faces from company galas, colleagues who'd smiled at her over champagne while Theo plotted her ruin. Her 20% stake in Apex, inherited from her father, gave her a right to the seat. But today it was more than a shareholder's privilege. It was a throne from which she'd watched justice strike. Evelyn's nod was subtle, a signal that everything was in place. Across town, the FBI had raided Claire Beaumont's apartment at dawn, arresting her for tax evasion and prostitution. Now at precisely 9:01 a.m., the net was closing on Theo. Hadley's pulse thrummed with anticipation, a mix of dread and exhilaration, as she prepared to face the man who'd betrayed her. The boardroom doors swung open, and Theo strode in, his blonde hair gleaming, his smile as effortless as ever. He was mid-laugh, charming a colleague with that easy charisma that had once won Hadley's heart. Then his eyes landed on her, and the laughter died. His steps faltered, his blue gaze flickering with surprise, then confusion, and finally a glint of fear. "Hadley," his voice was a whisper, laced with unease. "What are you doing here?" Before she could answer, the doors burst open again, and 3 FBI agents in dark suits stormed in, their presence sucking the air from the room. The lead agent, a woman with a stern jaw and a badge that gleamed like judgment, stepped forward. "Theodore Whitmore," she barked, "you're under arrest for marriage fraud, money laundering, prostitution, and tax evasion." The room erupted in shocked gasps, executives leaning forward, their faces a gallery of disbelief. Theo's skin paled, his confident posture crumbling as the agent read his rights, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "You have the right to remain silent." Handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the metallic snap echoing like a gavel. Theo's eyes darted to Hadley, desperate, pleading, as if she could unravel this nightmare. "Hadley, what's happening?" he stammered, his voice breaking. "I love you." The words were a final pathetic lie, and Hadley felt the last threads of her old self snap, replaced by a woman forged in her father's strength. She stood, her movement slow, deliberate, every eye in the room fixed on her. Her voice when she spoke was clear, a blade honed by days of silent fury. "You love my $30 million inheritance, Theo," she said, her words carrying across the silent boardroom. "The one you plan to steal after divorcing me. I heard you with Claire, plotting to take everything while I buried my father. I know about Aisha Carter, the woman you destroyed before me, and the others you preyed on. Your game ends today." Theo's mouth fell open, his face a mask of horror as the truth crashed over him. The executives whispered, their shock now tinged with respect for the woman they'd underestimated. "Sarah, please," Theo whispered, his voice raw as the agents gripped his arms. "Let me explain." Hadley stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his, unflinching. "There's nothing to explain. I heard you say you could barely stand to touch me. I know you've been taking kickbacks from Claire's escort business, using Apex clients to line your pockets. You're not just a cheater, Theo. You're a predator." The word hung in the air, heavy with finality. The agents shifted, impatient. But they allowed her this moment, the boardroom a stage for her reckoning. Theo sagged, his charm useless, his lies exposed. "The inheritance. You said it was nothing," he breathed, realization dawning. Hadley's smile was cold, lethal. $30 million, protected by my father, who saw through you from the start. You'll never touch a cent." The room was silent, the executives frozen, absorbing the scale of her power. Theo's eyes widened, the fight draining from him as he understood he lost everything. His freedom, his schemes, his carefully crafted facade. "Sarah, I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking as the agents began to lead him out. Hadley shook her head, her voice steady. "I'm sorry for Aisha, For the other women you ruined, and for the years I wasted loving a lie. Theo's cries echoed down the hall, his calls for her fading as the elevator doors closed. Hadley stood tall, the boardroom's glass walls reflecting her unbroken spirit. She caught Evelyn's proud nod, a silent acknowledgement of her victory. Outside, Hadley glimpsed Claire in an FBI van, her blonde hair disheveled, her eyes wide with fear. Their gazes met briefly, and Hadley felt no pity. Only the weight of justice served. She turned away, her heart steady, the woman she'd been reborn in the fire of this moment. Theo had thought her naive, but he'd chosen the wrong woman to betray. Marcus's legacy had armed her, and now she was unstoppable. Hadley Monroe stood on the balcony of her new Park Slope penthouse, the Brooklyn skyline shimmering below like a canvas of possibilities. The morning sun bathed the city in gold, its warmth kissing her skin as she leaned against the wrought iron railing, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. The air carried the faint hum of life, car horns, distant laughter, the pulse of a city she now commanded. Her navy silk robe fluttered in the breeze, a far cry from the wrinkled funeral dress she'd worn when she first uncovered Theo's betrayal. The $30 million trust from her father, Marcus Monroe, had transformed her from a grieving, betrayed wife into a woman of power, and this penthouse, its sleek lines and expansive windows chosen by her alone, was a testament to her rebirth. Inside, fresh lilies adorned a glass coffee table, their scent a quiet nod to her father's memory, a reminder of the strength he'd instilled in her. The weight of the past still lingered, but it no longer crushed her. Theo Whitmore, once the center of her world, was now a fading shadow, his arrest in the Apex Innovations boardroom a vivid memory that fueled her resolve. The FBI had unraveled his crimes, marriage fraud, money laundering, prostitution, sentencing him to 20 years in federal prison. Claire Beaumont, his accomplice and mistress, was serving 15 years, her escort empire dismantled, her smug laughter silenced. Hadley's victory had been public, her voice in the boardroom a clarion call that had echoed through the city's elite circles. But today, in the quiet of her new home, she wasn't reveling in their downfall. She was building something new, something hers, a legacy that would outshine the pain Theo had inflicted. Her phone buzzed on the balcony table, a message from Aisha Carter, Theo's previous victim, now a partner in Hadley's fight. Helped another woman escape today. Your foundation is changing lives. Hadley smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. The Marcus Monroe Trust, funded by a portion of her inheritance, was her proudest achievement. It offered legal aid, counseling, and safe havens for women trapped in predatory marriages, a shield against men like Theo. Aisha, whose Chicago real estate fortune Theo had plundered, had been the foundation's first success. Hadley had provided startup capital for Aisha's new education nonprofit. Watching her thrive in Atlanta, her confidence restored. The foundation was more than charity. It was justice, a way to turn her pain into purpose, ensuring no woman would suffer as she and Aisha had. She stepped inside, the penthouse's hardwood floors gleaming under skylights, and settled at her glass dining table with her laptop. The screen glowed with the foundation's quarterly report, detailing dozens of women supported, legal fees covered, new careers launched, lives rebuilt. But another email caught her eye from Evelyn Harper, her lawyer. Civil settlement finalized, $3 million from Theo's assets, split among you, Aisha, and 2 other victims. More investigations are opening in other states. Hadley's lips curved into a grim smile. Theo had thought he'd steal her inheritance, but instead his liquidated assets, his share of their old brownstone, his savings, were now funding the women he'd tried to destroy. The irony was a quiet triumph, a final twist of the knife. Her phone rang, Evelyn's name flashing. Hadley, her lawyer's voice was bright with victory. The settlement's just the start. The FBI is digging into Theo's past, suspecting more victims across state lines. This could lead to broader charges. Hadley leaned back, the city's skyline framing her view. Good, she said, her voice steady. Every woman he hurt deserves justice. The call ended, but the words lingered, a reminder of the scope of Theo's crimes. He'd been a predator, targeting women like Aisha, like her, for years. But Hadley had stopped him, her father's trust the cornerstone of his downfall. Another call interrupted her thoughts, this one from Daniel Brooks, Evelyn's law partner. "Morning, beautiful," he said, his voice warm, grounding. "Lunch today?" Daniel had been a constant through the legal battles, his steady presence a contrast to Theo's calculated charm. Their working lunches had evolved into something more, a cautious hope Hadley hadn't dared to feel since Theo's betrayal. "Sounds perfect," she replied, her smile genuine. "That cafe by the river?" His laugh was soft, familiar. "Our spot. I've got news, good news." She hung up, her heart lighter, the prospect of a real connection with Daniel a spark in the new life she was building. Hadley returned to her laptop, her fingers pausing over the keys. The foundation wasn't just her work, it was her redemption, a way to honor Marcus's legacy while rewriting her story. She thought of the photo on her nightstand, her and her father at her graduation, his arm around her, his pride a tangible force. "You're stronger than you know, my star," he'd said, and now she felt it, a strength that had carried her through betrayal to triumph. The penthouse was quiet, but it was hers, filled with choices she'd made, not lies she'd been fed. She stepped back onto the balcony, the city alive below. Brooklyn, once a backdrop to her pain, was now a canvas for her future. Theo had tried to break her, but he'd forged a warrior instead. With her wealth, her purpose, and a flicker of new love with Daniel, Hadley was free, unbroken, unstoppable. She raised her coffee mug to the skyline, a silent toast to Marcus. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered, "for teaching me to fight." The dawn stretched before her, bright with promise, and Hadley Monroe was ready to claim it all. What an incredible journey Hadley's story has been, right? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Did her strength inspire you, or what would you have done in her shoes? Drop a comment below and let us know where you're listening from. A huge thank you for joining us on this thrilling ride, and if you don't want to miss more stories of triumph and justice, hit that subscribe button to catch our latest videos. Share this with a friend who loves a good twist, and we'll see you in the next one. Stay curious and keep fighting for your own story.